Good evening. I live in a restored heritage house with an infill in my backyard, for which I received a 2007 City of Vancouver Heritage Award. In May of 2007, I wrote a letter to Council raising issues about impacts of eco-density on heritage programs and neighbourhood character. I suggested as an alternative to RT10 zoning a non-strata secondary suite over a garage for an incentive to retain existing character buildings. I wish I could say I support the current laneway housing proposal, but unfortunately I cannot. I postponed the decision to the fall. Rather than proceeding with the present proposal in the middle of the summer when most people are away, postpone this to the fall to allow for an improved program. Most of the speakers in support have personal interest in either building on their property or selling prefab units. The representatives of the neighborhoods are all opposed to this existing plan, and Council needs to have more broad support before proceeding with a broad rezoning. Retention of existing buildings. The laneway housing is often referred to as hidden density, but density is not hidden if the character of the neighborhood and streetscape are changed. The Vancouver Heritage Commission wrote an extensive memo to Council outlining proposed recommendations for laneway housing that I support, but staff did not include the Heritage Commission's primary recommendation that suggests allowing laneway housing only as an incentive to retain the existing house. I'm concerned that laneway housing has become a further incentive to demolish the existing stock rather than helping to reduce the unsustainable demolition of an average of 700 houses per year in Vancouver. What is now proposed will result in new construction monster houses with mini monster infill behind. All of the exclusions from the calculated target area will allow a much bigger building, so the economic assumptions for land values require new analysis. Code issues such as requiring separated sewers also put more pressure on demolition of existing houses, and I can speak to both of those later. Although my first choice would be using laneway housing as an incentive to retain existing buildings, the Planning Department is resistant to this option, so I'd like to suggest an alternative. One of the objectives stated by Council for laneway housing is that it is an incentive for owners rather than developers. Therefore, allow laneway housing with a new house, but only after 5 years from occupancy. That way, it will not be used as part of a new spec development, but still allows a homeowner to add a laneway house later. The 5 years would be important to make it not viable to builders to hold spec houses for the required 3 years to qualify for capital gains tax exemptions under principal residence status. Also, anyone who builds a laneway house with an existing house could be restricted from applying for a new main house for 5 years to prevent the builder from building the laneway house first and then the main house on spec. This would not reduce demolition, but it would effectively take away laneway housing as a benefit to developers. 3, non-strata provisions. Since laneway housing is a self-contained unit, it is more vulnerable to stratification than most secondary suites and needs legal protection to ensure that it will not be stratified. Therefore, the covenant on title to prevent stratification should not be removed after a year, but should be required for all laneway houses for the life of the building. And 4, need for a real pilot project. The rezoning with monitoring raises many concerns. It is likely there will be 100 applications right away upon rezoning, which we've already discussed. Once rezoned, applications cannot be easily stopped, and there could be possibly thousands of applications approved before the first 100 projects are complete or problems are identified and addressed. A much more controlled, real pilot program should be undertaken before rezoning. This is not like basement suites, which are enclosed within the envelope of the main house. Laneway housing has much more complexities and site impacts that have never been broadly tested in Vancouver, and a different approach needs to be taken. 5, involve the vision committees. Also, neighborhood character varies throughout the city, and the visioning process allows for these differences. all the council-approved visions have approved directions to retain neighborhood character with protection of heritage and character buildings. Laneway housing should be implemented with much more input from individual vision implementation committees with a neighborhood focus. A real pilot program before rezoning would allow for that to happen. That's
your time. Thank you very much, Ms. Murphy.
Is it possible to address a few issues that were brought up earlier about some of the exclusions and that kind of thing? Because I think
if you want to go back on the list.
I have to go back on the list?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to go back on the list,
okay.
Please. Thank you.
We'll put you there.
Speaking to the mic this time. Can you hear me better there? Thank you. So, as I was saying before, I do want to see some kind of laneway housing program be successful, but as far as I can see it, the existing program is really problematic, and there's a lot of things that have not been really fully addressed, and also have been very misleading in how they've been presented. I mean, even with regards to the square footage, okay, there was some reference before to, and I made some reference to exclusions. And there's exclusions of in the way they calculate the floor space. It's supposed to be only 500 square feet, but it excludes the first of all the calculations of the garage space. So if you have an interior garage area that's adjacent or attached to the laneway house, that's excluded, but the likelihood is that the car will go and that'll end up being part of the unit, more than likely. So, and that's like 226 square feet per car. So if you have a two-car garage that's attached to the laneway house, that's excluded space. So you're looking at 450 or whatever. Up to 240, whatever that is. Anyways, and then you've got exclusions for the, like if you have a sloping roof. Normally how these things are calculated is that anything that is higher, like a floor-to-ceiling calculation that's higher than 4 feet would be counted in your floor space. But they're saying that anything up to 7 feet will not be counted. So that can add a lot of extra square footage. It's actually usable space. I mean, they're only required to have, 6'8", I think, for a basement to have a suite in it. So really, you're allowing usable space. And then they're also excluding covered porches, all that kind of stuff. They're excluding the stairs, the stairwell, so the square footage of the stairwell, and and they're allowing basements. That the basements are only really a crawl space because that's only 4 feet, so that's really a crawl space. But anyways, for all the other things, not the basements, but for all these other exclusions, they can increase the floor space by 25% on top of the regular, plus what you get for the garages. So these units could actually be quite a bit bigger in terms of massing. And to give it some context, on a 33-foot lot, you could get like your base 500 plus 125 for the 25% of exclusions, which was 625. Plus you've got up to 2-car garage, say, that could be in built-out space that could be attached. So if you had one built out, that's 850 square feet. If you had 2 spaces built out, that's over 1,077. And the above grade square footage on a 33-foot lot on a new house would end up being about 1,800 square feet, 1,811 square feet. So basically, you're adding 50% above grade square footage to a lot. Like, that's quite significant. And then on a 50-foot lot, you've got 750 square feet as a standard, plus your 125, which would give you 185. So that's 935 square feet, plus one parking space, which would bring it to 1161, plus another parking space would bring it to 1387. So these units are relatively significant for, and they may be fine in some situations, but really the issue is that it should be, none of this was in the modeling, none of this was explained to people. It all came out in, like, you didn't realize what kind of size we were really talking about until the bylaw came forward, and some of the additional things even came out after that in these memos that just got posted last week.
So you're at your 5 minutes again?
Okay,
a little
do I
over.
have to come back? Okay.
You want to come back on?
There we go.
Okay. So Dan Murray. Dan Murray is next.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to get through this a little faster here. So getting back to my previous point that the units themselves will be considerably larger than what was presented both to the public and also in addition to what was first put forward by council for the public hearing, then there came out these two memos that came up last week. And one of the memos refers to the footprint of a laneway house and what would be allowed. And it says that the footprint of a laneway house must not exceed the greater of the allowable floor area of an accessory building under the applicable district schedule and the allowable floor area of the laneway house, not excluding the enclosed covered parking spaces if the height of the blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so essentially what it's saying is that you can have, the footprint would be the accessory building and the floor area of a laneway house. Now, I don't know if they meant or, but it says and. And so theoretically, the footprint then could be quite a bit bigger than what was proposed because it was always intended that it would be the size of a garage, which is an auxiliary building under the bylaw. Also, the allowable floor area of the laneway house, if it is the part as large as the actual floor area, would be bigger than the what would be the footprint of the garage. So it would go into the yard space or the side yards or whatever. And none of these things were modeled as part of what was brought forward to council. And in some instances, they may be fine. I would just suggest that any of these kind of things need to be conditional and not just at the discretion of the director of planning, but also to have some input from the neighboring properties because these things are going to have a lot more impact than what had been previously presented. And I think it's extremely unreasonable to come forward with a proposal that dramatically changes the neighborhoods without really and across the whole city, 70,000 properties. That's an awful lot of impact. And if you're going to do something like that, first of all, the consultation should be very transparent, and it should be inclusive, and it should be piloted because this is not like basement suites. It's very different than basement suites, and in the sense that it is impacting a lot more on the neighboring properties and property values, and we don't know how this is going to work out because it's an experiment. It hasn't been done. And so doing a pilot project is the right way to go, and it should be limited. The other thing is with regards to code issues, and the separation of the sewer issue is quite important as far as retention of existing houses, for the reason that if you have a new house development, the part of that new house development will include separating the sewer system. So it is much less expensive to do the laneway house and hook up with a separated system, because you only have to hook up to the house. If you're doing a retention where you're wanting to keep the house, getting that sewer system out to the street can really disrupt the site, because you may lose trees, landscaping. It's very expensive to do these hookups, and it is a burden on the retention model. Whereas if you allowed them to hook up to the main house, it would help not to give the incentive for tearing down. But the main thing is that, you know, this whole process should have been more transparent, and the things that were brought forward in this bylaw are not what was put forward at these consultations, and the issues around stratification are really a problem, because people are going to be pushing for it, just like we've been hearing, and there is not enough legal protection to ensure that these things are not going to be stratified. They only have to have a covenant on title if it's a new house, and that only has to stay on for a year. But the thing is that, unlike secondary suites, these can be more easily stratified, because when it gets referred back to the city, even if it's an existing building and it gets referred back to the city, if the building is to code, it's very hard to not allow it to be stratified. And I think that all of these laneway houses are going to have to be built to codes, and they're completely self-contained, so they're a lot more vulnerable. So really, there needs to be a covenant on every laneway house, and it needs to be kept on there for the life of the building. If you want to keep these rental, if you want to keep it non-strata, that's the way you got to go. Anyways, that's my 2 bits worth. Thank you.
Okay. You have a question, Ms. Murphy, you do have a question from Council.
To staff, I'd actually like to hear your comments on Tuesday, if that's what we're doing, or when we're done with the question period, around the issue of covenants and the protection against stratification.
Can you hear that now? I mean, that would be nice for everyone to know.
They need some work to do, I think. I apologize, but we're trying to get through the speakers. It's going on 11, so if you have a quick answer now, feel free. But
I think we can give a quick answer. Okay. It's up to Council.
Yes.
Quick answer.
First of all, Council has been very clear, and staff are very clear, that stratification is not supported. This is only rental. That has been messaged continuously and consistently throughout. As for the issue of whether there's sufficient legal protection, Ms. Watt?
You want to answer, or do you want me?
Quickly.
We start with a covenant because you don't, and Ms. Roth will correct me if I'm wrong. We start with a registered covenant because Council does not have power to prevent stratification when a building is built new. Once a building is existing, we say people can get rid of the covenant, because then it is your power, and you have strata policies, and in fact, the strata policies you already have apply to basements, and we are, as one of the, can't remember which motion item it is, but one of them is for you to amend the strata policies to include laneway housing. The only reason we let people out of the covenant if they want to is because then it becomes under Council jurisdiction.
So this has been considered by staff, and you've got the protections in place, and perhaps we can ask for some more detail when we are debating this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Louis, do you have a follow-up?
Just a clarification. It's not that it's only rental. But Rod, you can use it for personal use as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
It can't be stratified or so.
Yeah.
Right. Or subdivided.